we started building AI, luckily, several years ago because we saw the blue ocean opportunity long before, Sam Altman was getting on stage and talking about his AI interpreters.
And welcome everyone to Slator Pod. We are back with Boostlingo. Great to welcome back Bryan Forrester on Slator Pod today. So Bryan, as many of you know, is the CEO of Boostlingo, a US-based interpreting technology services and AI company. Hi, Bryan, and thanks so much for joining us on round 2. This is the second edition of our podcast.
Hey, Florian, how you doing? I think it's been a couple of years, right, since I've been on. It's good to see you again.
Probably a couple of years, yeah. So you're recording this now from Austin, Texas today, or?
That's right. Yeah, I feel like I'm here 70% of the time. This is where our headquarters are, and we've had a very cold week here in Austin. It was snowing, which is unusual. I think we only get snow every 3 years or so.
So did that shut down the city, or you guys were able to cope?
We were able to cope. At least our power didn't shut off like the last time this happened, and our water kept running. But the city of Austin doesn't have like snow plows or ice machines. So when it gets below 30 degrees, it's probably dangerous to drive a lot. So we mostly just stayed home. But the kids liked it. They got the sled out. Even though the snow melted in like 12 hours, they enjoyed it while it lasted.
Sledding in Austin. Cool.
Yeah.
So, tell us about what happened since our last podcast. I think it was April 2022, if my notes are correct here. So, I don't know, past 2.5 years. And also kind of refresh our listeners' memory about what Boostlingo does and the tech you provide and the services.
Wow, April 2022?
April 2022, man. It's been a while.
Oh, it's almost 3 years. Wow. That's crazy. I remember it like it was yesterday. A lot has changed. I could talk about what's changed since then. But just to kind of set the stage for your viewers that maybe missed the previous podcast, Boostlingo, we are a technology company focused on building solutions in language interpreting specifically. So, from our early founding days and our humble beginnings in 2016, we really set out to build, technology to enable language access and interpreting. So really to empower our customers and the clients they serve, to increase communications, break down language barriers. And so really since our beginning, we focused on specifically language interpreting tech and building a better mousetrap in language interpreting technology. And that now has turned into, I think we talked a little bit on the last pod about all the different products we sell and the different kind of ICP customers that we sell to. So we cover a lot of different use cases in interpreting. People outside the industry may not be familiar between the difference between interpreting and translation, right? Interpreting really is spoken word. And within the subset of interpreting, the interpreting market, there's a lot of different use cases. So we really try to build technology that covers a wide breadth of use cases for our customer base. Founded in San Francisco in 2016, as I talked about on the last pod, we moved the business, relocated in 2020 during COVID. I packed up the U-Haul with my family and drove across the country to Austin so my kids could go to school because, of course, all the schools were shut down in California, and my kids were learning nothing on Zoom conferences. So we wanted to get them in a classroom. And my wife is originally from Austin. And we'd actually already hired a few people here. So we decided to relocate the business in Austin. But we kept a lot of our employees in the Bay Area. So I still go back there frequently. We have, I think, a little over a dozen employees still in the Bay Area. And now, we fast forward just kind of high-level milestones for the business. In 2021, we took some institutional capital with Mainsail Partners. I made a couple acquisitions in 2022. Happy to talk about that more if you want, Florian. And, we bought a company called VoiceBoxer and another company called Interpreter Intelligence. And since we last talked in April 2022, a lot has changed. I'm trying to think back to what the world was like in April 2022. I would say we've at least doubled, maybe close to tripled the business since then. we've added additional products like Boostlingo AI Pro to our solution suite. We earlier in 2024 we did a whole company rebrand, new website, new look. So that was a big monumental effort that I think turned out really well. And I'd say we at least doubled our customer count since the last time Florian, you and I talked. So a lot of growth, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, you guys ranked third in that Inc. 5000 list that we put not third in Inc. 5000 list, but third among the handful of kind of language industry companies that actually made the list in the first place, right? So they put you at like 592% in growth in 3 years. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. We've actually made the list 3 years in a row, and each time we were under the 1,000. In the top 1,000 of the Inc. 5,000. So we always say we're Inc. 1,000 recipients internally. That's what we like to brag about. Now that Inc. 5,000 award, a lot of people apply, a lot of companies apply. They don't get it because it has pretty strict requirements in terms of how much you have to grow and the size of your business. But it gets harder to achieve as you get bigger because it's based on growth rates. And as you have a higher you start out the company, if you start off the year with 500 million in revenue, it's really hard to get 500% growth, right? It's easier to grow 500% from 2 million in revenue. So the fact that we're able to continue to be on that list, I think, is a huge accomplishment. It says a lot about how the business is performing.
And I guess you mentioned M&A, so I guess M&A played a bit of a part in that as well. But so maybe just briefly talk me through the integration. Like how did you do it? What did you like rebrand or not? Like, are the original brands are not around anymore, right? I think I tried to access the VoiceBoxer website. I think it's offline. So you kind of integrated all of that?
Yeah, so VoiceBoxer has evolved into now what we call Boostlingo events. But it's we've left some of the what I would say the secret sauce that Sergio, Nikolai, and team have built in terms of some of the really cool features. And so we try to keep some of the same look and feel. We've changed some aspects of it to also integrate more Boostlingo looking components into the platform, and really trying to standardize everything under the Boostlingo brand. And interpreter intelligence has now become Boostlingo II. And so, but again, the product looks similar to what it did. I think we've done a lot in terms of all the different integration work streams of those companies, whether it's looking at how we've integrated people, processes. The technology integration takes time, so we haven't fully integrated like all the back ends of these different platforms. And I'm not sure in some ways we want to do that completely, because in some ways it makes sense to keep them somewhat separated. But in terms of the user experience, kind of that single pane of glass UI, or single sign-on. So doesn't matter what Boostlingo product you use, it all feels the same. That's what we're sort of driving towards this year. That's a big initiative for us. But I think a lot more integration has happened since April of 2022. I think when we last talked, we were maybe 8 or 9 months into those acquisitions. Yeah. So it was still very much, drinking from the fire hose. As I mentioned on the previous podcast, when we closed those two acquisitions, I think Boostlingo had like 40 employees, and both of those companies had like 15 employees each. So, and they closed about a week apart, right? Yeah. So nice. That was a lot for us to absorb. We were kind of, it felt like scrambling for the first month or two, but we really ended up, it ended up being a much smoother transition. But it just, that's a lot to absorb, going from 40 to 70 employees almost overnight. But yeah, it's gone really well. And both those platforms are performing really well in our product portfolio suite, kind of meeting the original investment thesis we had when we made those acquisitions.
So you have a large client base among the LSPs, right? In Europe, but also particularly in the US. So what are you hearing from them about how the market's moving, and how do you help them perform in their business? How do you help them grow?
Yeah, it's a great question. We hear a lot from our LSP partners and a lot of different perspectives in a lot of areas. And The LSP customers we serve are not homogeneous, right? It's a very heterogeneous landscape, and what I mean by that is they all have very different, kind of strategies and processes. One LSP might do 90% of their revenue as translation and 10% is interpreting. Others might be the inverse of that, where you have 90% interpreting and 10% translations. Some LSPs focus on very specific verticals, so that they only focus on federal government contracts. Others might focus on healthcare or legal. But I think across the board, what we're hearing from, I would say in general, from not only our LSP partners, but our LSP prospects, who we hope to be partners, we hear that language interpreting is one of their largest growth levers looking ahead. They see interpreting as a pretty green market still, with huge opportunities. They continue to see this trend of migration from on-site interpreting in a lot of use cases to remote and on-demand interpreting. And we're also hearing that there's more pricing pressure on the translation side. The AI, like the machine learning ahead of it, AI is already having a pretty big impact, not just on the translation workflows and translation technologies. That's rapidly evolving, but on things like captioning and transcriptions, right? AI is having a big impact there. So they're having to pivot and invest in new technologies quickly in order to compete there. Some are doing that actually really well. I was just talking to an LSP yesterday, a partner of ours that grew their translation business 35-40% last year, which is impressive because I think overall there's been some headlines that it was sort of flat, the translation revenue in 2024. So some of them have actually outperformed that, but I think it's really because they made the right investments, technology investments to do that, and obviously had the right go-to-market strategy. But interpreting is different, right? Our LSPs are telling us this is a huge growth lever, and they're very interested to hear our perspective on how to grow their interpreting business and how we see technology impacting interpreting, because there's not a ton of content out there around AI specifically on how it's impacting interpreting. You hear a lot about it kind of in generality or across the language industry, or maybe specific to things like translation. So I think we try to be thought leaders for our partners in that area as well. But there's also, we hear about, I hear from LSPs that are looking to acquire other LSPs. So they're coming to me and they're coming to our leadership team and saying, hey, anybody wants to sell? We're looking to buy more LSPs. And so there is some consolidation going on in the LSP market. And I continue to think that some of the smaller LSPs will be acquired. And the large LSPs, though, I think, that have the money, the resources, the right kind of strategy, they're going to be fine. It's just a matter of finding the right revenue streams to pursue.
Yeah, I think one thing that AI is doing is redefining the TAM, the total addressable market, a bit. Maybe a bit, maybe a lot. And I mean, you guys also, you launched like real-time captions, transcriptions, and like speech features, certain AI features. So I think this all will lead to potentially a much bigger TAM, but in some of these other areas like captions and speech, right, there's very different competition emerging from all sides. So for you, how do you decide which additional features to work on, which AI features to work on? And maybe, just give us a brief walkthrough of the new features, the things that you've launched maybe in the past year or so based on these new technologies.
And you think about developing AI as it's a very different process than kind of traditional agile development, right? So you have to kind of approach it from a different mindset. But I think generally when we think about what features we want to build, it's the same with our sort of AI strategy as it is everything else. So what do our customers want? What are they asking for? Right? We don't want to just build AI features for the sake of building AI features. I mean, we have brainstorming sessions where we come up with 500 AI features we could develop. Which of those are actually going to matter for our customers? Right? I think that we start there, and I kind of think about features in three categories: customer retention, customer growth, and then what I call blue ocean decisions. So those are kind of looking 4 or 5 years ahead. You're placing bets on things. Maybe your customers are not asking for them today, but you're placing a bet that they're going to be asking for them in the future. And so we have to look at all three of those. Customer retention, of course, is customers say, you need to build this feature for me. I can't run my business properly without it. It's sort of the I need to have versus I would like to have, right? Customer growth features is if you added this feature, I could double my revenue with these 3 customers of mine. We hear that from LSPs all the time. And then sort of the blue ocean opportunities, that's really kind of looking at the horizon and seeing long-term trends and placing some bets. And so we try to chip away in all of those swim lanes when we think about what AI features to develop. You don't always want to be the first to in market with a specific feature if the quality isn't there, right? Because it's like first impressions matter, and so we also want to make sure that when we push something to production and general availability, that it's state of the art technology. So we're also careful and methodical around how we are setting up a quality framework to test the AI that we're building.
I think if you have like you guys have kind of a very competitive moat, you've built a moat around your workflow product. Like you don't really want to be one of the super early trailblazers with AI because this thing is moving so quickly. If you spend too much time and energy on it, like in a couple of months from now, it may be obsolete. It's maybe one of the few instances where you just want to wait a little bit and see, and then carefully roll out.
I was just testing an AI platform in our industry. I'll keep them anonymous, not to throw anybody under the bus, but I mean, it just did not perform well, right? I mean, it as soon as you added any complexity to the conversation, it just kind of went off the rails.
Yeah.
And this is a product that they have released into general availability, right? And so we feel like if you release something that really doesn't work well, that only hurts your brand. And like you said, I think kind of like you mentioned, Florian, like you release something today, it might be not relevant 3 months from now. What has staying power? And I think, and we're really focused on that too.
And also, how do you decide? Everybody's not model agnostic. I mean, it's kind of funny to look back and thinking people could develop their own foundation models like 18, 24 months ago, right? Now it's obviously you're model agnostic, we're just plugging it in. But then, what do you put on top of that in terms of customization, I guess is a big question.
We combine leveraging third-party technology versus training our own model, right? So that's our strategy is, look, there's already great products and great LLMs out there that we can leverage. So we have a technology pipeline where we're leveraging a lot of different AI technology vendors. Because what we find is, Google might be really good at speech to text for English to Spanish, but they're not as strong as another product, into Arabic or for text to speech, which is very different than speech to text. And so what you have to do is you have to find which of these providers are the best at all of these things. So you got to have a pretty robust what we call ground truth to test all of these platforms against to make sure you're leveraging the best option for what the task you're trying to do, because they all have their strengths and weaknesses, which is a very tall order, right? I mean, that is it requires a lot of testing, and it requires a lot of the right framework in place in order to make sure you get the right outputs. But what you're doing essentially is you're taking the best ingredients from all of these different third-party applications, and you're creating what we call the best recipe. And that recipe is really unique to Boostlingo, right? We found kind of the best of each of these third parties, and that's what we serve up to our customers. On top of that, Boostlingo has a lot of data, right? Yeah. We have a lot of data, and we've built this anonymized layer into our AI. So when there's sensitive content like personal healthcare information, right? That can be anonymized and not included in transcripts or in anything we would store. So that's really valuable to our customers who care about security and compliance. But we are training we're making our models smarter because we can use and leverage some of the data that are going into products like Boostlingo AI Pro to make the model better over time. So it's a kind of a combination of all these things. But, we started building AI, luckily, several years ago because we saw the blue ocean opportunity long before, Sam Altman was getting on stage and talking about his AI interpreters. So luckily, we were quite a bit ahead of this. But we're still learning every day. We're learning new things because it's crazy how quickly it's evolving.
You mentioned healthcare. Just U.S. healthcare is obviously a huge client for the language industry generally, and interpreting in particular. Like, where do you see progress in deploying AI for healthcare? Like, which use cases may already work, which are just kind of off the table for now? Like, is it just you check in and you take down your initial details and that's where the AI ends, or where do you see this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of people, outside of our industry, that don't understand the complexities of language interpreting, they'll ask a question like, "Oh, why can't Google Translate just replace all the iPads in the hospital that are using language line and just why can't the hospitals just use AI? Why are humans needed?" Right? And that is, I think, so far from the truth. When we talk to healthcare clients, they have a lot of anxiety and apprehension about using AI, especially speech-to-speech technology, where in some cases you'd be introducing this, you're replacing the human with the AI speech-to-speech technology. They're more open to AI features on the periphery. I think like things like meeting transcripts and summaries are very valuable to nurses and doctors and things like that. But actually, Boostlingo last year we actually published our interpreting ebook guide on decision making between humans and AI. How does an LSP or an end user customer like a healthcare provider or even just a general business decide this is a good use case for AI, but in this use case, I need a human interpreter, right? And so we walk through in that ebook, Catherine Allen on our team, who's very well known in the industry.
She was on the podcast a few weeks ago.
So. Oh yeah, that's right. And so she's, she basically kind of lays it out as we see it, at least from our perspective, how you go about making these decisions, right? First of all, there's compliance considerations. You have to think about, and I'm just speaking in healthcare, right? You've got compliance considerations in different verticals. I'm happy to talk about those as well. But in terms of healthcare, you got things like the Section 1557 in the Affordable Care Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, HIPAA. You've got other privacy and compliance things in Europe like GDPR that you have to consider. So is this use case going to be in a regulated environment, right? Like I would argue a patient talking to their doctor about cancer should not be facilitated with AI, right? Because not just of the compliance considerations, but because the complexity of that conversation. Another consideration is you got to assess the risk, right? What's the risk? The subject complexity. Clear and straightforward conversations. Florian's going to Japan and he wants to order sushi at the restaurant. You're going to be good using Google Translate or Boostlingo AI Pro. You probably don't need a human interpreter for clear and straightforward conversations that are short form, that have no deep technical or abstract topic. You got to also assess the setup, right? If you think about a lot of the conversations that go through the Boostlingo platform, a doctor's office, for example, right? You got the patient, an iPad, and a doctor, but oftentimes you have two family members in the room and the nurse. So now you got an iPad with one speaker, one microphone, that's trying to figure out how is an AI going to figure out which of those 5 people are talking in the room? That's where I've seen in some of the testing I've done personally I was just using this product called HeyGen the other day.
Yeah.
That basically translated what I was saying into Spanish. It was very spooky to just hear how it took my tone and voice and made it all into Spanish. It did fine for a 3-minute conversation where I was just speaking into a mic slowly. Actually spooky how good it did. And then I took the camera and I was recording me and my kids playing a game of Monopoly. Right, we had the Monopoly board out. I wanted to see how it was able to track the different voices, and it had a lot more challenges there, right? Because it started assigning my voice was my 10-year-old's voice, and people were the audio got all muffled. So you got to consider the setup. What's the mic setup? Does everybody have their own individual mic? Is everybody remote? Is there not a lot of background noise? Because obviously AI can't perform when you don't have the right environment, and humans, especially on a video, can sort all that out.
Yeah.
And then I think another consideration is the language, right? AI, Spanish to English, AI is going to be a lot stronger than indigenous languages. You probably need to use a human interpreter, even for low complexity conversations in a really rare language. The AI models aren't there. So there's a lot of considerations when you're thinking about just even in healthcare. When can you use AI and when can you not? What we find generally is no. In most healthcare conversations that go through our platform, we're very far away from AI speech to speech being able to replace a human interpreter. But there's a lot of hybrid opportunities where an interpreter can work with AI tools sort of in harmony to increase quality. And so that's kind of what our focus is. Now, that being said, we do believe AI speech-to-speech technology will continue to get better. And so for low complexity type of conversations, like we have customers like fast food restaurants where they need it for very short form, 3-minute, 4-minute conversations. The complexity is low. That's an opportunity for AI to come in and save the customer money. But for the vast majority of our customers in these regulated industries, what we're focused on more is how is AI going to enhance their experience? They're pretty adamant about using humans.
Yeah, and there's also kind of it's difficult to roll this out in stages, I would assume, right? In stages. I mean, you'd say like, well, if it doesn't work for 80 or 90% of my use cases, like I won't be bothered because the existing process with the humans and remote works just well. And, the savings would be nice, but in the grander scheme of things, not material, I would assume.
That's right. Well, we did a survey of our customer base and we found that 5 to 7% of them were open to the idea of AI interpreting. 80% were like adamantly against it. In fact, we had customers telling us, if you try to push AI, we're going to go with another provider. But it just shows you that a small portion of our customer base is open to it. And it tends to be these use cases that are not in regulated industries. Or for our LSP partners, they're working with customers that have these sort of short form, low complexity conversations, and they're breaking the bank. Human interpreting is too expensive for them. So it's interesting to look at that.
The 80%, is there a layer of kind of protecting their own turf, or probably not as much as it would be in written, like in localization, right? Where people have built up these large, complex localization teams, and then if you took the human out, a lot of that complexity would fall away. So there's a bit of protecting their own turf in localization. But in interpreting, it would seem like a hospital administrator would just say, well, if it works and like the AI, then I have no incentive to not roll it out. But so I guess they don't see any real opportunity yet for AI.
I think they're rightly concerned about not just the accuracy and the latency.
Yeah.
When you do a translation job, it's okay if it comes back in an hour or two, right? When you're doing on-demand interpreting, milliseconds of latency can impact the entire experience. Accuracy matters. Right. But even more than that, what we hear is privacy, security, and compliance, right? In fact, they just amended a part of the Affordable Care Act provisions that say basically if you're going to use AI in interpreting use cases, in healthcare settings at least, there has to be a human to review that. Well, how do you do that in an on-demand call? So healthcare providers are worried about all of these things. Hey, what happens if some patient's PHI information gets into like some open cloud, Google Cloud? Like we can't afford that. Human interpreters have to sign very strict confidential agreements. Like there's just a lot of risk if all this data is flying around on transcripts and summaries and captions. And I think they also understand and appreciate the complexities of language. I think if I remember correctly, the last time I was on the pod with you, I had predicted that human interpreters would be replaced, long after every car on the road was driverless. I still stand by that statement because of how hard it is to be a professional interpreter. And it's not just taking written words and putting them into spoken language. It's the spaces in between. It's reading between the lines. It's context, it's sarcasm, it's tone, and it's how you deliver that emotion that's so critical in so many of the conversations we provide. I always argue it is a different universe than translation. That being said, we definitely believe AI is going to play a bigger role, just like it will play a bigger role in all of our lives across different industries. And we want to be focused on building the AI features that really help our customers. And what we're finding is what adds the most value are these peripheral AI features, where not only are we enhancing the experience for our customers, we're also enhancing the experience for our interpreters. We're building tools to make their job easier. So it's a win-win.
So talking about those interpreters, I think you recently rebranded I think it was originally called Professional Interpreter Network, BPIN, to the Boostlingo Hub. Tell us more about the Boostlingo Hub.
That was part of our rebrand that we did early in 2024, I'm sorry. So what we started realizing is that we had this BPIN, which stands for the Boostlingo Professional Interpreter Network. But we were starting to get a lot of more jobs requested from our customers for translations. Like a lot of our LSPs, they do a lot of translation work, but sometimes their customers would ask to do a translation job, and maybe they didn't have the right translator. So they would come to us and say, hey, can you get this job done for us? And so what we were having to do is expand the BPIN into just more language professionals that weren't necessarily interpreters. So it didn't make sense to call it the Boostlingo Professional Interpreter Network when we were using translators. So we decided that the Boostlingo Hub would incorporate all language professionals. Now remember, one thing that's unique about Boostlingo is we don't work with these translators and interpreters directly, right? In that sense, we're not really an LSP. We route interpreting calls or translation jobs to our Boostlingo Hub partners. So we have over 50 LSP partners that are participating in what we call the closed marketplace of the Boostlingo Hub. So these are over 50 different labor pools that we can route calls to. And a lot of these Boostlingo Hub partners are also our customers, most of them, in fact. So they pay us a lot of money every month. We pay them a lot of money every month. It's a very symbiotic, mutualistic relationship in that sense. And we have a lot of other LSP partners that are asking to become part of the Boostlingo Hub. So there's a waiting list, and we're mindful on how quickly we can add more partners to that ecosystem. But essentially, the Boostlingo Hub is a closed marketplace of LSPs that manage their own pools of interpreters. And I think that makes us a little unique in the industry. When you look at other large interpreting companies, they generally have their own pool of interpreters. We've actually found that by working with these different LSPs and having very high requirements to become a B-Hub partner, that we actually can increase quality by working with LSPs that really know what they're doing. And also, really monitoring which ones are meeting our standards. We can also kick out LSPs out of our Boostlingo Hub marketplace if they're not meeting our very high quality standards.
Got it. So there's been a bit of a political change in the US and in the past few months. So, and a lot of the demand in the language industry in the US on the interpreter side is driven by, various regulatory frameworks, like language access, I guess, being the biggest catch-all for this. So what are your thoughts about the new Trump administration coming in? And, they obviously issued a ton of executive orders this week. And I don't think language access was caught up in it, but what are you seeing? What do you expect?
Florian, it's almost like we lived through this before.
Yeah.
there was another Trump.
Yeah, now he's ready though. Now he's prepared.
Now he's got the pen out. He's doing even more executive orders, right? I think, look, I actually have a kind of a more nuanced view on this whole thing. I think it's going to create some headwinds for our industry, but I also think it will help our industry in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, in our industry, we live by the sword, we die by the sword. Like, regulations are good to a certain extent, but what we find is a lot of our customers, whether or not you have Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, they're not buying interpretation services because of that. They're buying interpretation services because it's good for business.
Yeah.
Right? So 35 million people in the United States don't speak English fluently. 35 million, it's estimated. They can talk about building bigger walls at the border, but that's, it's impossible for that number to shrink greatly. I don't care if they deport 1 million people this next year. I mean, the vast majority of those 35 million people are here legally. There are some that are here illegally, for sure. But the demand for language access will continue to increase, and it continued to increase during the Trump administration. So we want to monitor it closely. Obviously, some regulations are bad for the industry, right? We see in some states, like in Oregon, where they're trying to pass these laws that would be really bad for remote interpreting and language access, right? The legislature in Oregon has a union that, is pushing for a law that would make it harder for healthcare providers to use OPI and VRI services. From Boostlingo's point of view, we think that's really a bad approach. So potentially with, cutting regulations in that case would be actually very good for the industry, right? So I think it goes both ways. But I don't think it's going to I think people are overthinking how much of an impact it's going to have. I think it might create some small headwinds, but our outlook is that the world will continue to become a smaller place. There's only so much you can do to slow down globalization, and people need language access. And a lot of people that need language access today are still not getting it, which means there is a huge opportunity to expand. And that's kind of how I view it.
It's macro, and also generally, maybe the economy is going to perform really well. Macro versus micro and regulatory could be good or bad. You're right. I mean, Europe's regulating like there's no tomorrow. Some places, luckily, Switzerland is still taking it a little easy under regulation. But generally, what's your take on Europe as a market? Have you guys made a lot of headway there? Is it on your roadmap? Do you plan to grow there, or just generally your view on Europe as an interpreting market? I keep thinking, why hasn't anybody rolled up Europe in some type of big consolidation play? It's still like super regional, national, very complicated.
Europe is interesting for sure. I think you kind of bring up a good point where I would say, look, this is where you can take regulations too far. I would argue that the highly regulated environment of Europe makes it less appealing for Boostlingo. We're still very excited about that market, so don't take it the wrong way. Huge opportunities. We have some great partners, great partnerships, and we're working on some really large opportunities in Europe. And you think about Europe, you've got all these languages.
Yeah. It's an obvious market.
Bundled up on this continent. I mean, it's an obviously going to be a great market for language services. But then I think about the healthcare market, like in the UK, right, where you have the National Healthcare Service. And we can debate, is a private healthcare system better or worse than a public healthcare system? I think there's a lot of arguments, pros and cons on both sides. I mean, the US market is extremely expensive, right? There's a lot of waste. But in in Europe, if you're one of the two LSPs or three LSPs that gets a contract with a national healthcare service, then you're rolling in the dough. But it shuts out a lot of smaller LSPs from participating in that market. In the United States, because of the way the system is set up, thousands of LSPs can compete for that market and that pie because there's thousands of healthcare logos you can go sell to. So in that way, it's more democratic. It's less of a monopoly because of you don't have that highly regulated everything's in the public sector type of environment. I think Europe is a huge opportunity, though. I got to say, like on demand and phone and video interpreting is still in its infancy there. So we think there's a huge opportunity there, and we see opportunities for partnerships in certain regions to grow large interpreting pools. So when we think about kind of our top 5 growth levers for Boostlingo, international expansion goes to the top of the list.
All right. So last question. What's in store for you, Boostlingo 2025? What are some of the priorities?
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be a lot of announcements coming on things we're working on. I mean, one of the things we're going to do is continue to double down for our LSP partners, right? They are what create growth for Boostlingo, and so we have to be developing more features for them. I would say in 24 we had to focus more on technical debt and investing in infrastructure, making sure we're setting up the business to scale, and investing in R&D. But now that we've made those R&D investments, we want them to bear fruit, and so we're going to be developing at a higher velocity features that our language service providers want. This is everything from reporting features and more scheduling features for on-site interpreting, but there'll be a lot more investment there. Just last year, we added 2 or 3 developers to our II team, another 6 or 7 developers to our Boostlingo IMS and on-demand team. So we're adding a lot of R&D spend, and so that will really help our partners. I think you're going to see us working on more integration projects. Integration is huge to Boostlingo because a lot of our customers, our LSPs, our LSP clients, they use everything from EHR platforms to telehealth platforms. It's really important that we integrate into those customers' workflows. We think that makes our product more sticky, and it's something that a lot of our customers are asking for. So we'll continue to do that, and then of course AI. Yeah. We just announced. I think it was Tuesday, maybe it was Wednesday, our AI advisory board. So we've brought in some technology consultants to help guide us from an AI strategy standpoint, which is really exciting. These are not lightweight folks. These are people that have a lot of experience in building amazing AI technology. So they're going to guide AI strategy. They're going to assess technical feasibility and implementation plans, all while making sure we're promoting ethical use of AI, right? So very important. But you're going to start seeing some really interesting AI features over the course of 2025 and 26. The next time we talk, Florian, in 2 years, it'll be an interesting conversation. I'm hoping you'll invite me back on the pod, but it will be, it's going to be a really exciting ride. We see this as a huge opportunity for the industry. Like AI, yes, it poses some risks in certain use cases, but I think the opportunities outweigh the risk tenfold. Because what I think this is going to lead to is a revolution where you're going to see 1,000 times more interpreting jobs processed in 5 or 10 years versus what you see today. And some of that will be pure AI, some of that will be human, depending on the use case. But the same thing happened, for example, with pictures, right? In 1990 versus 2025, how many more pictures are taken today than were taken in 1990, right? I get out my iPhone in the morning and I take 30 pictures of my kids. Before I had to walk to Walgreens and get the film developed. The more easy the technology makes it, the lower cost, the more people are going to use it. And so what excites me is that there's a lot of people and companies in the world that don't have access to language access technology that will because of AI. And that gets me really excited because Boostlingo's mission is to expand language access, especially in underserved communities. AI is going to make it happen. And so we're excited about that.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope in 3 years it's not my avatar inviting your avatar, and we can still do this we can still do this live as real people. But that was super interesting. Thanks so much for taking the time today, Bryan.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks, Warren. Appreciate it.